The steel targets were meant to break grown men. When a 19-year-old girl stepped up to the firing line at Coronado, seasoned Navy SEALs laughed out loud. They bet money she wouldn't hit a single plate. 2 minutes later, she didn't just silence them. She completely redefined what lethal meant. The Pacific Ocean off the coast of Coronado is not just cold. It is a living, breathing entity that violently consumes heat, morale, and willpower. It was 0300 hours on a Tuesday during Hell Week, and the water temperature hovered at a bone-snapping 54 degrees. Class 342 had started with 184 hopefuls. Now, there were barely 40 left, shivering in the surf zone. Among the massive, shivering frames of Division I linebackers, Olympic swimmers, and hardened Fleet Marines stood 19-year-old Cassidy O'Connor. She was 5'7" and weighed 140 pounds soaking wet, which, at this moment, she very much was. To the instructors pacing the shoreline in their dry, warm, green fleece jackets, Cassidy wasn't just an outlier. She was a glitch in the system. The Pentagon's recent mandate allowing women into naval special warfare had forced the brass to let her through the doors, but the unwritten rule on the grinder was simple. Break her. Fast. Master Chief David Miller, a 20-year veteran with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and beef jerky, held a bullhorn. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice cut through the crashing waves with terrifying clarity. "I see a lot of dead men out there," Miller drawled, his boots crunching on the wet sand. "I see boys who miss their warm beds, and I see a little girl who took a wrong turn on her way to college. The bell is right here, O'Connor. 3 rings, a hot cup of coffee, and a blanket. Stop playing dress-up." Cassidy locked her jaw to keep her teeth from chattering. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead at the black horizon. "Focus on the breath," she told herself. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. To her left, a towering assailer named Daniel Jenkins, a guy who had deadlifted 500 pounds on day 1, suddenly broke. He stumbled out of the surf, weeping uncontrollably, and sprinted for the brass bell. Ding, ding, ding. Another one gone. "Jenkins is out," Miller announced, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Who's next? O'Connor, you really think you're gonna outlast these boys? You're 19. You don't know anything about Juan yet." But Master Chief Miller didn't know Cassidy's history. He saw a petite teenager from Wyoming. He didn't see the thousands of hours she had spent in the unforgiving Wind River Range. Cassidy's father wasn't just a rancher. Arthur O'Connor was a former Marine Corps scout sniper, a ghost who had operated in the Korengal Valley and Fallujah. While other kids were learning to ride bicycles, Arthur was teaching a 7-year-old Cassidy how to read wind mirages through a spotting scope. By the time she was 15, she could calculate the Coriolis effect in her head. She knew pain. She knew patience. And most importantly, she knew how to hide her true capabilities until the perfect moment. Her strategy in BUD/S was calculated survival. She didn't try to win the log PT. She didn't try to be first on the O course. She stayed squarely in the middle of the pack, conserving her energy, enduring the endless barrage of insults, and refusing to give the instructors the satisfaction of a reaction. Weeks turned into months. Hell Week ended. The class shrank to 22 men, and Cassidy. The resentment among the remaining candidates was palpable. They weren't just exhausted. Their egos were bruised. They were the elite of the elite, yet they were bleeding, puking, and suffering right alongside a teenage girl who never seemed to complain. Petty Officer First Class Jackson Reed, a fast-talking, arrogant operator who had just reclassed after a disciplinary issue in a Ranger battalion, took her presence as a personal insult. "It's a PR stunt," Reed muttered one evening in the barracks, loud enough for her to hear as she meticulously cleaned her boots. "The brass is grading her on a curve. They want to post a child. First time she takes contact, she's gonna freeze, and one of us is gonna take a bullet covering her." Cassidy paused her brushing. She looked up, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Reed's. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show anger. "Are you done, Reed?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Because your boots look like garbage, and inspection is in 20 minutes. Reed flushed red, stepping forward, his massive frame towering over her. "Listen here, little girl. Save it for the range tomorrow," Cassidy interrupted, standing up. "I hear we're finally shooting live rounds. Let's see if your aim is as loud as your mouth." The room went dead silent. The challenge had been issued. Up until now, Bud/S had been a test of physical endurance and mental fortitude. Tomorrow, they would transition to the third phase, land warfare and marksmanship. Tomorrow, Cassidy O'Connor was going to stop holding back. The Naval Special Warfare Advanced Sniper Facility is tucked away in an unforgiving, sun-blasted stretch of desert known only to those with the right security clearances. The heat off the tarmac was thick enough to distort the horizon, creating dancing mirages that made target identification a nightmare. Senior Chief William Tanner, the lead marksmanship instructor, was a legend in the sniper community. He had 72 confirmed kills and a demeanor as cold as dry ice. He stood before the 23 exhausted candidates, a line of custom-built, suppressed Mark 13 sniper rifles resting on the shooting mats behind him. "Marksmanship is not about pulling a trigger," Tanner barked, pacing the line. "It is applied mathematics, atmospheric science, and absolute psychological control. You will be shooting at distances where the rotation of the Earth moves your target before your bullet arrives. Most of you will fail." The candidates paired off into shooter-spotter teams. Naturally, Cassidy was paired with Jackson Reed, an arrangement Tanner made deliberately to test their friction. "All right, sweetheart," Reed sneered as they settled onto the mat. "I'll shoot first. Watch and learn how the big boys do it." The morning was brutal. The drills started at 500 yards, then pushed back to 800. At 800 yards, a crosswind began to rip through the canyon, unpredictable and shifting. Reed, despite his arrogance, was a solid shooter. He hit 4 out of 5 steel plates, grunting in satisfaction. "Your turn," Reed said, sliding over to the spotting scope. "Target is the yellow plate, 850 yards. Wind is full value from 3 o'clock, about 10 miles an hour. Dial 3 MOA left." Cassidy slid behind the rifle. She settled her cheek against the stock, her breathing instantly slowing. She looked through the optic. Something was wrong. She peered at the wind flags out in the distance. She watched the dust kicking up at the 400-yard mark, then swirling in the opposite direction at the 700-yard mark. Reed's wind call was wrong. It wasn't a consistent 10-mile-an-hour crosswind. It was a tunneling draft that shifted velocity mid-flight. But there was something else. As she reached to adjust her turrets, she noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch on the elevation knob. She checked her 0. The scope had been subtly tampered with. It was off by at least 2 minutes of angle, enough to make her miss by over 1.5 feet at this distance. She glanced up. Not far away, she saw Chief Warrant Officer Nathan Croft, another instructor, whispering to Master Chief Miller. They were watching her intently. It wasn't Reed who had tampered with it. It was a test, a blind, unannounced stress test designed to humiliate her in front of the class. You gonna shoot today, or are you waiting for an engraved invitation? Reed mocked from the spotting scope. Wind's shifting, Cassidy said softly, her eye pressed to the glass. She didn't touch the turrets. If they had messed with her 0, adjusting the dials would only confuse her baseline. She would have to do something nearly impossible. She would have to shoot using Kentucky windage, holding the reticle completely off the target in empty space, calculating the broken 0, the tunneling wind, and the bullet drop purely by instinct and mental math. Send it, Reed scoffed. Cassidy exhaled. At the very bottom of her breath, between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. Crack! The heavy point, .300 Winchester Magnum recoil slammed into her shoulder. 2.5 seconds later, a sharp ping echoed back across the desert. Reed blinked, looking through the spotting scope. Hit. Dead center. Dumb luck. Call the next target, Cassidy said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. Red plate. 1,000 yards, Reed said, his tone slightly defensive. Wind is picking up. Cassidy didn't hesitate. She didn't adjust her dials. She factored in the broken 0, calculated the drop, held her crosshairs in the empty beige dirt high and left of the steel, and fired. Ping! Hit, Reed whispered, leaning closer to his glass. For the next 10 minutes, Cassidy put on a clinic. She didn't just hit the targets, she painted them. 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards, 1,400 yards. The rest of the firing line had stopped shooting. The men were turning around, staring at the 19-year-old girl who was racking the bolt of her rifle with the fluid, mechanical precision of a Terminator. Master Chief Miller and Senior Chief Tanner slowly walked over, their faces unreadable. Hold your fire, Tanner commanded. He looked down at Cassidy, then at Reed. Reed, what's her grouping like? Reed swallowed hard, stepping back from the spotting scope. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. Senior Chief, she just put 5 rounds into a 3-inch circle. At 1,200 yards. Tanner's eyes widened a fraction of a millimeter, the equivalent of a gaping jaw for him. He knelt down beside Cassidy's rifle and inspected her scope. He saw the turrets. They were exactly where they had been left when the rifle was sabotaged. Your elevation is dialed for 500 yards, O'Connor, Tanner said slowly. Your windage is completely zeroed out. How the hell were you hitting steel at 1,200? Cassidy finally sat up, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. She looked directly at Master Chief Miller, who had orchestrated the sabotage. I noticed the optic was compromised when I got behind the glass, Senior Chief, Cassidy said evenly. I assumed it was a field-expedient drill for a broken sight, so I held over. Miller stared at her, stunned. You shot a 3-inch group at 1,200 yards, using holdovers, with a tunneling crosswind? Yes, Master Chief. That's mathematically impossible, Chief Warrant Officer Croft muttered, stepping forward. You'd have to calculate the spin drift and the Coriolis effect in your head in seconds. Tussle. Spin drift for the 220-grain Sierra Match King at this altitude pushes the round approximately 4.2 inches to the right at 1,200 yards, Cassidy replied, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the range. Coriolis accounted for a 1.8-inch drop due to our firing azimuth. The wind was a half-value headwind for the first 400. Then it funneled through the canyon at 12 miles an hour. It wasn't impossible, Chief. It was just math. The silence that followed was deafening. The hardened, muscle-bound SEAL candidates looked at each other in utter disbelief. Jackson Reed was staring at her boots, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Tanner stood up. He didn't smile, but a strange glint of profound respect flickered in his eyes. He looked at the rest of the class. "Did you boys hear that?" Tanner roared, making several candidates flinch. "This 19-year-old girl just outshot every single one of you combined, with a broken rifle. She didn't complain. She didn't make excuses. She adapted, and she killed her targets." He walked right up to Reed. "Reed, you're off the gun. O'Connor is your shooter now. You're carrying her gear, and if she asks for a glass of water, you're going to find an oasis in this desert. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Senior Chief," Reed mumbled, thoroughly humiliated. Cassidy didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply reached down, picked up a brass casing, and slipped it into her pocket. She had won the Battle of the Range, but she knew the war was just beginning. The SEALs might respect her trigger finger now, but respect on the flat range was cheap. The true test was coming. In 2 weeks, they would graduate, and in 3 weeks, they were deploying to a place where targets didn't ring when you hit them. They bled, and they shot back. Graduation was a quiet, solemn affair. There were no marching bands, no media cameras, and no grand speeches. Just 22 exhausted men and one 19-year-old girl standing on the grinder at Coronado, receiving the coveted gold trident. When Master Chief Miller pinned the warfare device onto Cassidy's uniform, his knuckles brushed her collarbone. He pressed the pins in hard, a traditional SEAL greeting that drew blood. Cassidy didn't flinch. Miller's eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement, but still laced with deep skepticism. She had survived the training, but she had never seen war. 3 weeks later, the theoretical vanished into the horrifyingly real. Echo Platoon was deployed to a remote, unnamed forward operating base in the Syrian desert, just outside Deir ez-Zor. The landscape was a desolate ocean of chalky rock, ancient dust, and blistering heat that made the Californian desert feel like a luxury resort. Their target was a high-value munitions facilitator known as the Architect, a man responsible for equipping insurgents with armor-piercing, improvised explosive devices. Intel placed him in a fortified compound on the edge of a ruined industrial sector. The mission profile was standard: a nighttime helicopter infiltration, a 2-mile foot patrol, and a kinetic breach. Cassidy and Petty Officer Jackson Reed were detached as the Overwatch element. They set up their sniper hide on a crumbling 4-story concrete water tower, 1,450 yards to the east of the target compound. The night was pitch black, illuminated only by the ghostly green hue of their panoramic night vision goggles. Through the high-powered optics of her Mark 13 sniper rifle, Cassidy watched the assault element, led by Master Chief Miller and Chief Warrant Officer Croft, stack up against the compound's heavy iron gates. "Assault element in position," Miller's voice crackled through the encrypted comms in Cassidy's earpiece. "Overwatch, do you have eyes?" "Overwatch has eyes," Cassidy whispered, her breathing shallow, her crosshairs sweeping the rooftops. "Thermal is clear. No movement on the parapets." "Breaching." A suppressed explosive charge blew the hinges off the gate with a muted thump. The SEALs flooded into the courtyard like a localized storm, moving with lethal, synchronized precision. But the moment Miller kicked open the main door of the residence, the desert erupted. It wasn't a hideout. It was an ambush. Floodlights positioned on adjacent rooftops snapped on, blinding the assault team's night vision. Simultaneously, a deafening roar tore through the night. From a fortified, sandbagged bunker at the rear of the courtyard, A Dishka 12.7mm heavy machine gun opened fire. The massive armor-piercing rounds chewed through the concrete walls like paper, kicking up storms of shrapnel and dust. "Ambush! Ambush!" Croft screamed over the radio, the sound of heavy gunfire drowning out his words. "We are pinned down in the fatal funnel. Miller is hit. I repeat, Miller is down." Cassidy's heart slammed against her ribs. Through her scope, the courtyard was a chaotic nightmare of muzzle flashes and swirling smoke. She saw Miller lying motionless behind a crumbling stone fountain, his leg shattered, bleeding out rapidly. Croft and 2 other SEALs were desperately trying to lay down suppressing fire, but their 5.56mm rifles were entirely useless against the reinforced bunker. "Overwatch, we need that gun silenced now," Croft yelled, panic bleeding into his disciplined voice. "We can't move. He's tearing us apart." Cassidy swung her rifle toward the bunker. Reed was glued to the spotting scope beside her. "I have the Dish-K," Reed said, his voice trembling slightly. Combat was a vastly different beast than the flat range. Distance is 1,480 yards, but Cassidy, there's no shot. He's behind 3/4-inch steel plating. They welded a shield to the gun carriage. Cassidy stared through the glass. Reed was right. The enemy gunner was completely protected by a heavy iron plate. The only exposure was the tiny, horizontal loophole the gunner was firing through, a slit barely 4 inches tall and 6 inches wide. "I can thread it," Cassidy said. "Are you insane?" Reed hissed, his eye pressed to the glass. "It's a mile away. The wind is swirling from the thermals off those floodlights. If you hit the steel plate, it's just going to alert them to our position, and they'll turn that heavy gun on this tower. It will cut this concrete in half. Give me the wind, Jackson." Cassidy's voice was utterly terrifying in its calm. It was the same dead, flat tone she had used on the Coronado range. The panic of the moment simply washed off her. Reed swallowed hard, forcing his training to override his fear. He looked at the mirage and the smoke drifting across the battlefield. "Wind is blowing left to right. Call it 8 miles an hour, but it's updrafting over the compound wall. You're gonna have to hold low and left." Cassidy dialed her elevation turret, clicking it firmly into place. But as she prepared to settle in, a rocket-propelled grenade launched from a secondary rooftop, slamming into the compound wall just inches from where Chief Croft was crouching. The explosion rocked the comms. "They're flanking us!" Croft roared over the radio. "Overwatch! If you don't take out that gun right now, we are all dead!" Cassidy tuned out the screaming in her earpiece. She tuned out Reed's heavy, terrified breathing. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, transporting herself back to the freezing, snowy peaks of Wyoming. She remembered her father's calloused hand on her shoulder. "The bullet doesn't know who is pulling the trigger, Cass. It only knows physics. Control your heart. Control the physics." She opened her eyes. The green-tinted world through her scope came into hyper-sharp focus. The loophole in the steel plate was a chaotic strobe light of muzzle flashes as the enemy gunner poured fire onto her teammates. To make the shot, her bullet would have to travel over 4,400 feet, arc perfectly over the compound walls, cut through a shifting thermal updraft, and pass cleanly through a 4-inch gap without striking the edges. "Hold on the left edge of the slit," Reed whispered, reading the wind perfectly. "Wait for the gunner to pause to reload. You won't see him through the flash." "No," Cassidy said, her finger gently resting on the trigger. "If he reloads, he ducks down. I have to shoot him while he's firing." "Cassidy, you can't see him." "I don't need to see him. I see the geometry of his muzzle flash. I know exactly where his shoulders and head have to be." She exhaled, slowly, deliberately. At the very bottom of her respiratory pause, The world went completely still. Between the pounding beats of her own heart, she applied 3 pounds of pressure to the trigger. Crack! The rifle surged against her shoulder. Through the spotting scope, Reed tracked the vapor trail of the heavy sniper round as it ripped through the night air. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The bullet plummeted from the sky, slicing precisely through the thermal updraft. It didn't strike the steel plate. It vanished flawlessly into the 4-inch loophole. Instantly, the heavy DSHK machine gun ceased firing. The deafening roar in the courtyard was replaced by the sudden, shocking silence of the gunner slumping backward, neutralized instantly. "Good God," Reed breathed, pulling back from the scope, his face pale. "Impact. Target destroyed." "Assault element. Heavy gun is down," Cassidy reported over the radio, already racking the bolt and acquiring her next target. "You have a window. Move." So, with the DSHK silenced, Croft and the remaining SEALs sprang into action. They dragged Master Chief Miller's bleeding body out of the fatal funnel and behind the solid cover of an armored SUV in the courtyard. But the ambush wasn't over. 2 insurgents appeared on the northern rooftop, raising RPGs to fire down on the extracting SEALs. Crack! 1 insurgent dropped his launcher, folding over the parapet. Crack! The second insurgent fell backward into the shadows before he could even squeeze the trigger. Cassidy was a machine. For the next 10 minutes, she systematically dismantled the ambush. Every time an enemy fighter peeked out of a window, leaned over a roof, or attempted to flank the pinned-down SEALs, a round from the water tower found them. She shot with mechanical, terrifying efficiency, turning the courtyard into a dead zone for anyone not wearing an American flag patch. "Extract bird is inbound, 3 minutes out," Croft panted over the radio. "Overwatch, we are moving to the exfil point. Cover our 6. "Copy that," Cassidy said, her eye never leaving the glass. She and Reed held the high ground until the massive CH-47 Chinook helicopter flared down in the desert dust, its ramp lowering to swallow the battered assault team. Only when the helicopter lifted off did Cassidy finally engage her weapon's safety and sit back. Her shoulder was bruised black and blue. Her uniform was soaked in sweat. She looked over at Reed. The arrogant Ranger dropout, who had once mocked her for being a little girl playing dress-up, was staring at her with absolute, unadulterated awe. "I've worked with the best shooters in JSOC," Reed said quietly, packing away the spotting scope. "I have never seen anything like what you just did." "Let's pack it up, Jackson," Cassidy said quietly. "We have a long walk back to the LZ." The Tactical Operations Center back at the base was chaotic when Cassidy and Reed finally walked through the blast doors. Medics had stabilized Master Chief Miller, but his leg was heavily bandaged, and he was propped up on a gurney awaiting medical evacuation to Germany. As Cassidy walked past the medical bay to stow her gear, Miller grabbed the side rails of the gurney and pulled himself up, wincing in agony. "O'Connor!" his gravelly voice called out. Cassidy stopped. She turned and walked over to the man who had tormented her for months during Bud/S. She stood at parade rest, her face covered in dirt, sweat, and the grease of her rifle. Miller looked at her. He looked at her bruised shoulder, her calm eyes, and the quiet, dangerous aura she carried. He realized then what he hadn't seen on the beach at Coronado. He hadn't been looking at a 19-year-old girl. He had been looking at an apex predator hiding in plain sight. "Croft told me about the shot," Miller said, his voice raspy. 1,480 yards, through a 4-inch loophole, during a firefight. "I had a good spotter, Master Chief," Cassidy replied smoothly, nodding toward Reed, who was standing a few feet away. Miller shook his head. He reached out his thick, calloused hand. Cassidy took it. His grip was tight, but it wasn't a test of dominance anymore. It was an anchor of respect. "I was wrong about you," Miller said, the words clearly difficult for the proud veteran to say. "You didn't take a wrong turn on the way to college. You belong exactly where you are." He let go of her hand and lay back on the gurney, exhaustion finally taking over. "You saved my life tonight, Cassidy. You saved all our lives. You're a SEAL." Cassidy gave a crisp, brief nod. She didn't smile, and she didn't gloat. She had known who she was the entire time. It had just taken the rest of the world a little while to catch up. She turned and walked back into the armory to clean her weapon. There would be more missions, more targets, and the 19-year-old Widowmaker was just getting started. If this gripping story of Cassidy O'Connor's relentless resilience, impossible skill, and battlefield heroism kept you on the edge of your seat, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this incredible tale of defying the odds with your friends, and hit subscribe right now for more intense, real-life military stories. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of her legendary shot. Stay tuned, stay sharp, and we'll see you in the next video.